So guys, I'd like to talk about the Hamas protest that's going to happen on Armistice Day. And I want to talk about how we should be responding to that Hamas protest. And if you want to ask a question or you want to make a statement, then after each point I'm going to take a pause. And then if you've got something that you want to say or you want to ask, you can do. So on Armistice Day, which is the 11th of November, it is traditional that we remember the war dead from World War I and World War II. And on that day, Hamas supporters, under the inspiration of Hamas, are planning to do a march, and they want to go down Whitehall and past the cenotaph. This march is expected to be widely attended, ladies and gentlemen. But I want to be clear that we should not be fooled. This march has other agendas than just showing support for Palestinians. And I accept for a lot of the people that will go on that march, it will be about supporting Palestinians. However, there's other agendas that are going to be happening on that march that we shouldn't be blind to, such as, for instance, direct recruiting by Islamist networks, such as, for example, the fact that these Islamist networks and their supporters want to test their strength against the state and test the depth of allegiance of the Muslim community to an Islamist agenda or towards wider British culture. It's also about increasing the spread of Islamist ideology amongst Muslims and seeking to radicalize those Muslims in the direction of the Islamist narrative. It's about trying to fashion and to mold a singular Muslim bloc, a bloc vote, a bloc movement, the leaders of which will be those who are sympathetic to the Islamist ideology. And it's also about drawing people into the orbit of the Islamic community so that dawah can be done towards them. And there may be even other agendas besides the ones that I've mentioned, but British society should not be blind to the fact that these other agendas are happening on our streets as we watch those protests. Now, before I move on, I'll take a question or a comment. Speak now or I'll make another point.
Your sources for what you just mentioned.
Okay.
So a couple of things. The first thing.
No, sorry, I'm taking. Go on. You asked me about sources.
Okay, let me ask you.
Yeah, go on.
What sources I'm talking about? You mentioned that it's a Hamas march.
Yep.
So who's organising these protests, and how does that link them to Hamas and a wider agenda of Islamism? And then you mentioned that it's somehow to spread some kind of, to create this Islamist bloc. And then what sources do you have to back that claim up?
Okay, so firstly, who called for the International Day of Anger, the International Day of Rage? Who called Muslims to protest?
That's what you're calling.
It was Hamas. Now, if you're going to interrupt, sir, if you're going to interrupt, I'll just stop engaging with you. If you're going to just interrupt, I'll just stop engaging with you. Okay, so I'll respond to his points, but then I'm just going to ignore him if he's going to interrupt. So the reality is, Hamas is the one that called for the protests. Hamas is the one that inspired the protests. Hamas was the one that started the war against Israel. Hamas was the one that carried out the mass killing of Israeli citizens inside of Israel and has brought all the suffering on the Palestinian community. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear. These Muslims that protested for Hamas-inspired violence, you didn't see them protesting when Saudi Arabia killed nearly 1 million Muslims in Yemen. You didn't see them protesting for the Rohingya Muslims in China. You didn't see them protesting for the Muslims in Burma. What motivated them to protest? Was it when Palestinian Hamas killed Palestinian Fatah? Did you see them protesting then? No, you didn't. You only saw them protesting when it was Jews bombing Gaza. So in other words, if other groups kill Muslims, the Muslims are not inspired to do anything about it. But if Jews are the ones killing Muslims, then suddenly they're enraged. What does that tell you about their mindset? It comes from the mindset of dimitude. It comes from the mindset of dimitude. This idea that the Muslim community has to be supreme over other groups, and when other groups are supreme over the Ummah, then they are enraged. Then they are offended. Now, furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, this planned march by Hamas supporters on Armistice Day demonstrates the failure of British public policy. There is no requirement for integration in the United Kingdom. It's come in, whoever you are, unfiltered, bring whatever trashy belief you want, whatever trashy values you want, whatever trashy prejudices you want, and you don't have to change. That's the problem with British multiculturalism. The fact that the civic day of national mourning, in which every British family remembers their grandparents and their great-grandparents and how they died in war, is to be trampled on in a celebration of an orgy of violence in which the Jews suffered the biggest massacre of their population since the Holocaust, that many of our grandparents fought and died to stop, demonstrates a failure of integration. Failure to demonstrate a failure of integration. Before I move on to my next point, does anybody want to ask a question or make a comment?
With the Nazis, right? That's what they don't want to see us celebrating the defeat of the Nazis.
Right, ladies and gentlemen. It would be wrong to say that Hamas are with the Nazis. That's just not true. That's just not true. The fact of the matter is that Hamas and the Islamists have a separate ideology from Nazism, and to simply confuse the Islamists with the Nazis demonstrates that you don't know what the Nazi ideology stands for, and you don't know what the Islamist ideology stands for. Let's be clear, ladies and gentlemen. Let's be clear. The reality is that we as a society are proud of the fact that we stood against the Nazis, and we should be so. But it is now time that our society galvanize the same spirit that defeated the Nazis and pointed that fury at the Islamists, and pointed that fury at the Hamas supporters and the Hamas network and the Islamist armies around the world. I want to talk, ladies and gentlemen. I'll make a point and then I'll take a point. Ladies, and if you just interrupt, I'll stop. I won't take any points you make. If you just keep interrupting, I won't take any points you make. Let me make a point, then I'll come to you. Okay, I'm not going to talk to you then. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we saw the police, ladies and gentlemen, police the BLM marchers during COVID, they did so with kid gloves. All the COVID laws were broken and the police did nothing. BLM rioted in the streets and the police did nothing. Civic monuments to the heroes of this nation were graffitied and vandalized and the police did nothing. And what happened next was that veterans and former soldiers and patriots from around the country marched in London in protest about the BLM riots. And the police were heavy-handed against those veterans, those soldiers, and their football fans that came with them. They beat them with batons. They policed them with riot shields and helmets. They used tear gas and they drove them away. The police even allowed BLM supporters to try and commit murder in the street and in Trafalgar Square that is caught on camera, and there were no arrests and no attempt to arrest the person, the gang that committed the crime. Sorry, it was outside of Waterloo Station, I correct myself. But yet, ladies and gentlemen, consider how the police have policed the Hamas riots, the Hamas protests. They've done so with kid gloves, helmets off, no shields in sight. They held flags whilst Hamas supporters went up scaffolding and vandalized property and shouted, and the police made themselves useful to these protesters.
That's worse than dropping bombs.
Ladies and gentlemen, this should concern you.
He's a criminal himself.
Ladies and gentlemen, Islamist flags have been flown in the streets of the United Kingdom and the police have done nothing about it. And we'll get on to why in a second. Because it turns out that people who are sympathizing with the ambitions of Hamas were actually advising the police in the operations room where the police had their HQ, telling the police that the black flag of ISIS, of the Taliban, and the white flag of the Taliban and ISIS are not Islamist flags, ladies and gentlemen. We need a police force that is governed by people who are not afraid to stand up to Islamists and their sympathizers. Now, before I move on to my next point, is there anyone who has not interrupted me who would like to ask a question or make a statement? Were you raising your hand, sister? Sorry, no, go on. Speak.
It's a waste of breath.
Right, so the question is,
You're not going to listen to anyone, and you're talking horse shit without...
literally just answering his question, And the reason why I'm answering his question, ladies and gentlemen, is because he didn't interrupt, but he did, and he did. So in answer to your question, ladies and gentlemen, no, I'm not related to Tommy Robinson. Why is it that just because someone says that we shouldn't tolerate Islamist thugs and Islamist sympathizers in our country, that means they're alt-right? I'm a Christian. Christians have suffered for 1400 years at the sword and the dagger of the Islamists and their sympathizers, ladies and gentlemen. So, I'm going to make another point and then I'll take another question or another statement. These marches by Hamas sympathizers have been characterized by intolerance against those that disagree with them. There have been countless videos capturing these Hamas supporters attacking anyone who dares to protest against them. This is damaging to our democracy. The fact is that we do live in a democracy, and people should be able to protest against the Hamas supporters. The fact that these Hamas supporters have attacked anyone who has disagreed with them, and she says she's Hamas supporter, thus demonstrating that I'm not lying. Ladies and gentlemen,
your day is coming.
there you go, your day is coming, she says. I pray to God that my country will throw this woman out of our country. She has stated, do you support Hamas? Do you support Hamas? There you go. You're on camera. Let's hope that that gets handed over to the police. Let's stick it up on Twitter. Let's make her famous. And then, God willing, the police will arrest her and she will spend 7 years in prison. Because that is how we should treat. Was this camera rolling? Oh, bro, you should have been here. Did you get a face? Are you sure? Good. That is how we need to deal with these Islamists. When they reveal themselves to you, capture them on film, report them to HR, report them to the police, get them sacked from their jobs, get them kicked out of the country. Organize yourselves to resist these Islamists. Notice how she said your day was coming. Why were you not offended? Why were you not enraged? Why were you not angry to hear that pig, that witch, speak her poison in your country? To speak her support for the Islamists? Why were you cowardly in the face of her disgusting threats? Ladies and gentlemen, you must recognize that you have been lulled into a sleep by the media, by your politicians who lie to you constantly. These marches have been characterized by anti-Semitism. The last time that London saw anti-Semitic marches down the streets of London were by Mosley's fascists in the 1920s and 1930s. And the anti-fascists and the police came out to fight against these fascists because of their anti-Semitism. Why have we allowed anti-Semitic marchers through the streets of London unopposed, unchallenged by anyone? I'll tell you why. Because our society has been weakened by liberalism, by left-wing politics, by the progressives who teach you a mantra about tolerance and about inclusivity and about multiculturalism. And through this mantra, they have switched off your courage, your sense of right and wrong. These marches have been characterized by violence, physical attacks against police, physical attacks against those who disagree with them. These marches have been characterized by harassment of those flying the British flag. In your country, people flying the British flag have been accused of racism by the police, who allowed Islamist flags to be flown in London without challenge or consequence. Anyone who would like to ask a question or make a point who hasn't interrupted me, now's your chance. If you want to ask a question or make a point.
Okay, so I think that do you think Israel is an apartheid state by any chance?
So, ladies and gentlemen, do I believe that Israel is an apartheid state? No. Arab Christians and Arab Muslims have the same rights as Israeli citizens to vote, to be judges in the legal system, to be members of Parliament, and I believe at this very moment in time it is an Arab judge who will pass judgment on whether Benjamin Netanyahu is a corrupt politician. I may be wrong on that. Feel free to fact check me. I'm going off something that I vaguely remember from the past. The reality is, ladies and gentlemen, is that there is not a single Jewish citizen in Gaza. Not one. And across the Islamic world, Christians are treated as second-class citizens. In a number of Muslim countries, you cannot even be a passport-carrying citizen and a Christian in these countries, like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar, where 13% of the population live as second-class citizens precisely because they're Christians in a Muslim-majority country. We should start to challenge these Islamic apartheid governments, and we should call them out for their injustices. Everybody wants to tell you that we should oppose Israel's apartheid system, but they are totally silent about the Islamic apartheid systems, where Christians are persecuted, like in North Sudan, like in Iran, like in Pakistan, like in Syria, like in Iraq, like in Egypt, like in Yemen, like in Indonesia, like in Malaysia, and by Hamas, like in Gaza, where Islamist militants, after they overthrew Fatah, desecrated churches, decapitated a Christian for handing out Bibles, bombed a Christian library, and tried to forbid Muslims from celebrating Christmas with Christians, ladies and gentlemen. So, I'm going to press on and then I'll take another point. Now, there has been released on Twitter this idea that the flags of the cenotaph were removed because of the threat of an Islamist desecration of this civic statue. That's a lie. It's a lie. It's not true. The cenotaph is cleaned before November the 11th in preparation for Armistice Day. However, I want to make it clear that all of us who are opposed to Hamas marching down past the cenotaph on Armistice Day should demand that the police use the fullness of their powers to prevent the march past the cenotaph. Learn your democratic rights to demand appropriate policing for these things. Any questions or comments by someone who doesn't interrupt me, on the topic?
Ukrainian Nazi Christians, what do you say about them?
Going once?
Nothing. You've got nothing to say because you're an ignoramus. You're a fucking idiot.
If you had not been so pig ignorant, I would have answered that.
Yeah, well, you said there's nothing.
So, ladies and gentlemen,
Nazis, you say there's nothing.
ladies and gentlemen,
They don't want to just wipe Jews off there, so there's nothing in common, yeah? You say there's nothing in common. Who's the idiot?
I want to point out that thousands of people should come out to prevent the Hamas march from walking past the cenotaph. Thousands of people came out when the statue of Winston Churchill was defaced to protest against the vandalism of a British war hero. Well, the cenotaph, ladies and gentlemen, is a statue in honour of the families, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, the fathers, the uncles, the mothers, the sisters, the brothers of every British family who lost people in World War I and World War II and every war since those two wars. It remembers their sacrifice. It is a monument to our families, ladies and gentlemen. And the idea of an anti-Semitic, Islamist, hate-filled march walking past the cenotaph on Armistice Day should not be tolerated by anyone in this country who has a decent mind, let me finish, a decent mind or a decent conscience. And so I call upon you, all of you, that on November the 11th, you come to Whitehall and you stand by the cenotaph and you block the route of the Hamas supporters from marching past the cenotaph. You get your friends to come, your family to come. All of you who are veterans, come to Whitehall to stop that march walking past the cenotaph. All of you who disagree with Hamas, come to Whitehall and stop that cenotaph. What a beautiful thing it will be if thousands of British Jews were there protecting the cenotaph to show the difference that the Jewish community brings to the UK versus the migrant Muslim community. Ladies and gentlemen, what a wonderful thing it will be to see. Ladies and gentlemen, all of you who marched on the veteran marches against the BLM, all of you who marched with the EDL, all of you who have ever marched for any good cause, who want your families to be honoured, come to Whitehall on November the 11th and stop Hamas from marching past the cenotaph. Any questions or comments from those who haven't interrupted me? This is your chance to ask a question or make a comment.
Please just address so many Catholics hate Jews as well.
When you stop interrupting, any questions from or comments from people who don't interrupt me? Sorry, can I get that, bro?
Blame the Jews for killing Jesus. Will you address that point?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'll move on to my next point because you still don't understand manners.